Over the years, the Strasburg Railroad has hosted a variety of important trains. There's been the Amtrak 40th Anniversary Train, the Norfolk Southern Pennsylvania Railroad Heritage Unit, and of course, we can't forget Norfolk and Western 611, which is still wintered there as we speak. But back in the 80s, the Strasburg had a truly unique guest, a Zero Series Shinkansen train from Japan. In 1983, Japan National Railways was gearing up to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Tokaido Shinkansen, the first dedicated high-speed rail route not only in Japan, but in the world. To honor the occasion, JNR decided to ship 2 Zero Series Shinkansen train sets across the globe to run public demonstration trips. The first, sent to France, would run trips on the newly built TGV line between Paris and Lyon. The second, sent to the United States, would operate on Amtrak's Northeast Corridor between New York City and Washington, D.C. Or at least, that was the pitch. Executives at Amtrak were quick to point out a flaw in the plan. Between Washington and New York, the Northeast Corridor is electrified at 12 kilovolts, less than half of the 25 kilovolts needed to power a Shinkansen train. After much discussion, a solution was proposed. Rather than powering the train set directly, the Zero Series train would be pushed or pulled by an Amtrak E60 locomotive, which would power the train set's lighting, air conditioning, etc. JNR executives were skeptical at first, as this would look a little awkward, but they eventually agreed to the plan. At this time, JNR was facing increasing budget deficits due to underperforming regional lines, and after analyzing their finances, they realized they could only send one train set abroad. Public interest studies showed that a high-speed train set would cause more of a stir in the United States, which had no operating high-speed rail lines at the time. Thus, in November 1983, only one 12-car train set left the port of Tokyo, bound for Baltimore. This would be Shinkansen's first and only international tour, and the pressure was on. And this is where things went very wrong. The train set had already crossed the Panama Canal and reached the Atlantic Ocean when the Federal Railroad Administration dealt the whole project a devastating blow. After looking over the details, they ruled that while Amtrak could operate JNR's trains on the Northeast Corridor in a test capacity, they could not legally carry paying members of the public, as the Zero Series trains were too light by American standards. JNR executive Haruki Nobi, who had taken charge of the project, personally telephoned FRA Administrator John H. Riley, begging him to overturn the ruling, as JNR had sunk enormous amounts of money into this, and the Shinkansen had an impeccable 20-year-long safety record. Riley wouldn't budge, and the reason soon became clear. The Northeast Corridor was in bad shape compared to the Tokaido Shinkansen right-of-way, and the FRA was concerned that the inferior track work, combined with the train's lighter weight, could lead to a high-speed derailment. The next day, Amtrak President W. Graham Claytor Jr. called Riley to back up Nobi's argument, citing recent safety inspections that had been done on the corridor. Still, Riley was unmoved. The Shinkansen was simply not allowed to carry paying passengers on America's rail corridors. A week or so later, Riley was about to leave his office for the day when his secretary informed him that he had an incoming call. It turned out to be from Jonathan Kreider, events coordinator for the Strasburg Railroad. Kreider had a simple proposal. Since the Shinkansen was close to the East Coast already, it could be hauled by truck to Strasbourg, where it would be put on static display throughout the summer of 1984. Riley put Kreider in contact with Claytor and Nobi, and the three executives hit the ground running. The cost of shipping the train to Strasbourg would be covered jointly by Amtrak, JNR, and the Strasburg Railroad, aided by a grant from the state of Pennsylvania. After talking with his team, Claytor offered to lend an Amtrak F40PH to Strasbourg for the summer to haul the Shinkansen up and down the 3.7-mile line. Since the train's speed would never exceed 30 miles per hour, this would be immune to FRA regulations, and passengers could legally ride the train. Nobi thought Claytor was thinking too small. Would there be any way, he asked, to run the train set under its own power? Kreider said this would be a long shot, but he would see what he could do. By this point, the Shinkansen had reached the port of Baltimore, and Kreider, Claytor, and Nobi showed up at the docks to witness the first car being unloaded. While Claytor and Nobi had stressed that this would be a low-publicity event, Kreider either hadn't gotten the memo or deliberately ignored it, as a large crowd of rail fans showed up at the docks to witness the first modern high-speed train ever to arrive in America. Among this crowd was Baltimore Streetcar Museum founding president Jim Dalmas. Dalmas and Kreider met and struck up a conversation, and after only 15 minutes, Kreider was hurrying to introduce Dalmas to Nobi and Claytor. Dalmas's team of volunteers had constructed and maintained a network of trolley poles and wire for the Baltimore Streetcar Museum, and he believed they were more than capable of building a similar temporary system along the Strasburg Railroad to power the Shinkansen. Claytor offered to let the Strasburg tap into Amtrak's power from Safe Harbor Dam, which is carried on wires over the Keystone Corridor, and within a few weeks, a massive group of volunteers was planting poles and stringing wire from Strasburg to Paradise. A temporary substation was built at the Paradise end of the line, bankrolled entirely by JNR, and when the first power car arrived in Strasbourg, it successfully completed a test run along the full route with no issues. Unfortunately, one problem that really could have been foreseen wasn't. Since Strasbourg's roster of steam locomotives were, on average, over a foot taller than the Shinkansen, engineers were uncomfortable with the trolley wire's low clearance, and after locomotive 475 scraped against an active wire, causing a power outage to the active Shinkansen train set, a successful last-ditch effort was made to raise the catenary less than 3 weeks before the train set would begin taking passengers. On April 1, 1984, a grand opening ceremony was held at Strasbourg Station, launching tourist service on board the Shinkansen. Speeches were given by Kreider, Nobi, and Japanese Ambassador Yoshio Okawara, and Claytor was in attendance as well, along with Pennsylvania Governor Dick Thornburg. For the occasion, the power car of the train set had been given a special Strasburg Railroad logo, and it would retain this through its stay in America. Once word got out about the train, railfans, tourists, and locals alike flocked to Strasbourg to see it and ride on it. At Kreider's suggestion, a special past and future ticket could be purchased, which entitled the bearer to a ride on the Shinkansen and one of Strasbourg's steam trains. Photographers enjoyed capturing the 2 different eras of equipment passing each other near what's now Cherry Crest Adventure Farm. I couldn't find any of their pictures for the life of me, but shoot me an email if you know of any. At a special event on July 11, 1984, on a run without passengers, Shinkansen's crew accelerated their train to a full 60 miles per hour, setting a speed record for the Strasbourg Railroad that stands to this day. This run ended dramatically when the train collided with a cow that had wandered onto the tracks near Paradise Lane. The train was taken out of service and inspected, returning to work the next day. Other than the occasional power outage on the jury-rigged trolley wire system, the train set ran smoothly until its final revenue trip in October. Upon their last return to Strasbourg, the Japanese crew left a heartfelt message on the base of Strasbourg's water tower, which you can see whenever you visit. In November, the train was taken by rail to Philadelphia and shipped back to Japan, where it remained in revenue service on the Tokaido Shinkansen until 2000. While most of it was scrapped, one of its power cars is on static display at the British Railway Museum in York, and I had the privilege of seeing it back in 2019. Strasbourg's substation and trolley poles were almost immediately removed, as they were reviled by locals as an eyesore, but you can still see a couple of poles today near Carpenter's Graveyard, and the site of the substation was converted into a railfan park, which you can still visit when the railroad is operating. Overall, everyone involved in the project agreed it was a success, but that it was also enough of a logistical nightmare that it would never happen again. JNR's budget crisis only worsened after this, and it would eventually split into a network of private companies before the decade was out. Still, for a one-time event, Shinkansen's visit to Strasbourg had a lasting impact on Amtrak and on America as a whole. After riding Shinkansen himself, Claytor advocated for Amtrak to operate its own high-speed rail service on the Northeast Corridor. This advocacy eventually led to the 1993 trial of German and Swedish trains on the corridor, a tour inspired by the original plans for the Shinkansen visit 9 years earlier, and the eventual development of the Acela Express. On a broader scale, this event is believed to have played a small but significant part in the popularization of Japanese culture, food, and media in the United States, even if the event itself is largely forgotten. In fact, come to think of it, it's been insanely hard to find any media related to it for this video. If you were actually at the event, please leave me a comment and tell me all about it, and send me any pictures you have. So what does this obscure anecdote of railroad history mean for us today? Well, unlike in the 80s, we now have an electrified rail line that's up to Shinkansen specifications. When Amtrak electrified the Northeast Corridor from New Haven to Boston, it chose to use 25 kilovolt power, the same as what's standard on Shinkansen. Perhaps it's time for Japan to once again inspire Americans to build real high-speed rail by sending a train set to operate in New England. Or perhaps none of this story actually happened because it is in fact April 1st and you shouldn't believe anything you learn on the internet today. If I fooled you, you are legally obligated to like and subscribe. And if I totally didn't, if I got something completely wrong, please let me know in the comments. I did not do much research for this video. Anyways, thank you for watching this silly endeavor into alternate history, and take care until the next real video.